Welcome to be here. The mic is yours.
Thank you so much. And thanks again for inviting me to connect and speak with all of you. And thanks, Pablo. I think you probably got me into this. And Melissa, thank you so much for the arrangements and making this so easy. So let's see. So to get started, I think of this as one of our key challenges. How is it that individuals manage the competing demands associated with combining a meaningful and fulfilling career and family life? And this is something that I have been pondering since the 1990s when I was in graduate school. And at the time, the topic of work and family was really considered somewhat of a fringe subject. You didn't see it as a topic in IO psychology handbooks. It was kind of considered more of a woman's issue. And it's been fascinating over the past 2 decades to really see how much this topic has grown in terms of the scholarly literature, but also in terms of how much it's part of the public discourse as well. So it's kind of hard to get away from the topic these days. I think of it as a kitchen table topic. It's something that people talk about. It's something you see in the newspapers all the time. How is it that people can achieve work-life balance? How do you do it? What are the tips? So what I want to cover in our time together today is kind of lay out a basic foundation in terms of the research overall. So what is the current state?
¿Me podéis llamar en la tarde para que no se me olvide?
Tiene que taparse, mutearse. Creo que es Héctor.
So what is it that we know? And then some of the possible solutions that have been discussed and researched. And then I'm going to spend some time talking about some of the current work that we are doing that I think also leads into some important future topics of work-family research. So let's start with our basic foundation and the definition of work-family conflict. Now, work-family conflict is really the topic that has dominated work-family research. So I'm going to focus a lot on that today as well. So what is work-family conflict? It's a form of inter-role conflict in which work and family role demands are mutually incompatible in some respects, so that participation in one role makes participation in the other role more difficult. And we know that this works in 2 directions. That is, family can interfere with work. And I'm going to use the acronym FIW to represent that in the talk. And that also work can interfere with family. And that's represented by the acronym WIF. So our basic work-family conflict process model, we think of work-family conflict as this linking mechanism. It links one domain, the work or the family domain, with another domain, and we have predictors of conflict and outcomes of conflict. And there has been an abundance of research looking at predictors and outcomes. And the most common predictors are demands. So work demands tend to lead to work interference with family. Family demands tend to lead to family interference with work. And what I want to show you now is some effect sizes based on meta-analytic research, so you get a sense of how large these effects are. And by convention, a small effect size is considered 0.10, medium 0.3, and large 0.5. So you have the effect sizes represented here. And again, this is based on recent meta-analytic research, but you see that work hours and work demands have strong and robust relationships with work interference with family. And then family hours and family demands have strong, not as strong, but consistent, robust relationships with family interference with work. And I should mention that this meta-analysis was based on a cross-national set of effects where we were able to see if culture made a difference. And these findings are robust across cultures. So all cultures tend to, if there are greater work demands, they tend to experience more work-family conflict. And then on the outcome side, satisfaction has been one of the primary outcomes examined. And again, this is based on meta-analytic effect sizes. And you see that both directions of work-family conflict are associated with less job satisfaction. These are absolute effect sizes, less job satisfaction, less family satisfaction, and less life satisfaction. So those are some very basic, robust, common findings based on, again, the last couple decades of research. But what I tend to find even more interesting is what's at stake in terms of well-being. And that is one of my primary interests in connecting to the work-family literature is how this is associated with employee and family well-being. And what we know is that these competing work and family demands can come at the expense of employee health behavior and health. So we know that more conflict is associated with less physical activity. It's associated with unhealthy eating behaviors. It's associated with poor quality sleep. And it's also associated with some detrimental physical and emotional well-being outcomes. But not only is there an effect for the employee, can also come at the expense of child health as well. And so we know that more conflict experienced by parents is associated with less child physical activity. So if parents are engaged in less physical activity, that tends to be associated with less physical activity amongst their children. It's associated with greater child body mass, weight. We've done some research looking at family dinners, and more conflict is associated with less family dinner frequency and greater likelihood of having fast food for dinner. And these family dinners are associated positively with a whole host of positive outcomes. And then it's also been associated with adolescent core self-evaluations. So another factor that's at stake is that work-family conflict has implications also for the worker's career. Those who take time away from work for family are viewed in less favorably as having less commitment, less likely to be recommended for organizational rewards. And we've also done some research recently looking at how others perceive individuals who have a work-family conflict. And what we have found here is that others actually have favorable reactions when an individual experiences work interfering with family. And that kind of goes to the notion of wanting the work warrior, the person who puts work first. So that is associated with more favorable reactions. But family interfering with work is associated with less favorable reactions. And so this is amongst managers and coworkers. If we were looking at family members, we might find the opposite effects. But this is what's going to matter potentially matter in terms of someone's career. So those are some of the basic findings, and also what I think is at stake, people's health and their career development. So what are some solutions that have been considered? We can look at this from an organizational perspective as well as an individual perspective. And from the organizational side, we'll talk a little about flexible work and support. And then from the individual side is a study that we did on mindfulness. So workplace flexibility, this is a topic that we're going to return to a little later in the talk, but for years it has been considered as a solution to work-family conflict. If you give people flexibility, then they should be able to better manage their work and non-work. So this is, again, a meta-analysis that we did that looked at the relationship between flex time use, flexibility in terms of schedule, and then flex place use, which also is referred to as telecommuting or remote work. Now, this is really elongated. The effect sizes are extremely small. And in terms of flex time use, it's actually in the direction that you would not want to see, although that isn't significant. So the bottom line is that these flexible work policies actually are not very beneficial in terms of work-family conflict. There are some other outcomes that are more positive, such as job satisfaction, but in terms of helping people really better manage their work and family lives, these workplace practices, flexibility practices, are not the answer. So support. Here, the evidence is much stronger. So I've layered on to this graph so you can get, again, a sense of relative size of these effects. Coworker support, supervisor support, organizational support, all have moderate to closer to strong, robust, positive effects. So the more support that is received from coworkers, supervisors, from the organization overall, the less work-family conflict individuals report, particularly for work interference with family. So we know we have some idea of what's going on in the organization. Oh, yes.
Would you mind if I ask you something before we move to mindfulness?
Anytime, please ask questions anytime.
So just to bring this down, so what does this coworker support or supervisor support or organizational support look like in practice, like for organizations, for people that works in consulting, etc.?
Yeah, so I think the best example is the family supportive supervisor behavior. This is something that has been studied by Leslie Hammer and Ellen Kosick quite a bit, and it can consist of specific behaviors. So there can be informal support, instrumental support, but acknowledging that people have lives outside of work, and then helping them, which, that could take a variety of different forms, but identifying ways to help people better manage that. So it's recognition and tangible support as well. And what Hammer and Kosick have done is develop training that it can be delivered to managers on ways to actually do this. So mindfulness, so the organization, the way I tend to think of this is we need to think of both organizational approaches and individual approaches to work-family management. And my interest in mindfulness started with this study I did a while back, a qualitative study where we were trying to figure out how people interpret work-life balance for themselves. How do they define it? What does it mean to them? And this is one of the responses that we received. And what this individual wrote is, I like to think of it more as how present you can be in your work and your home life. When I say my husband's work-life balance is out of whack, it's because when he is not at work, he is still not fully present because of work demands. He's checking his email, fielding calls, thinking about projects, actively working on projects. I know that he disconnects from our family life while in the office. I wish he could disconnect from work when he is at home. So, really thinking about what it means to be present and how being able to be fully in the moment with the family when you're with family and fully engaged and involved in work when you're at work. And so if we trained people on mindfulness, could it help them in terms of reducing work-family conflict? So we tried this with a brief mindfulness intervention. We brought people into our lab and we delivered just a 1-hour workshop in person. And then we followed that up with behavioral self-monitoring. And we used what's called a switching replications design. So we delivered, we gave both our experimental and control group survey. We gave the intervention to the experimental group. We surveyed both groups again. Then we gave the intervention to the control group and surveyed both groups again. And I'll show you one graph from that study. And it actually, this is exactly what you'd want to see in terms of the pattern of results. So at time 1, you don't expect any differences between the two, but here you see the experimental group in green, and their work interference with family dropped while the control group stayed the same. And then after the control group received the intervention or the training, their work interference with family dropped. So we have some initial evidence here that mindfulness can help people reduce their work interference with family. So to summarize just this part of the talk, work-family conflict is a key concern for employees, their families, and organizations. And we need to consider both formal and informal practices and solutions. And ideally, organizational and individual approaches can work hand in hand. So an organization can support the delivery of mindfulness practice and also demonstrate support by doing so. Maybe supervisors and employees trained on mindfulness so that they can relate better with one another as well. And overall, we do need more intervention research. The research, for example, that has looked at flexibility tends to be cross-sectional studies done after the fact. And we need more, for example, pre and post research to better understand the effects of flexibility. So now I want to talk about some of more current approaches and work that we have been doing. And starting with this idea of looking at work-family conflict episodically. And if we consider virtually all of the research that I've covered thus far, it's based on, again, typically surveys that are strongly disagree to strongly agreement scale items. Here are a couple of example items. My work keeps me from my family activities more than I would like. My work causes strain that makes it difficult to fulfill family duties. So people answer strongly disagree to agree to items like that. And typically this is done without any reference to time. So people are just thinking in general, how much conflict do I experience? And you can think of that as representing some chronic level of work-family conflict. What we've seen in recent years are more daily diary types of studies where people might be asked, did you experience work-family conflict today? Again, on some type of agreement scale. But work-family conflict can really be considered in terms of episodes or events. can probably all think of experiences where there were these competing demands. You had to figure out what to do, to try to come to a resolution. How can I make things work? And so for the example showing here, January 1st, maybe there was a conflict in the morning. January 2nd, no conflicts occurred. It was a great, easy breezy day. January 3rd, there was something going on in the morning and then again in the afternoon, and so on. So we can think of both, minor conflicts that might occur on a daily basis, as well as bigger, larger types of conflicts. And why I think that other approach is problematic, the approach that we've been using for decades, is that participants really have to recall and determine if a conflict has occurred. Again, it's often based on a non-specified time period. It assumes that these conflicts can be reliably, cognitively aggregated. And we're really conflating cause and effect. And I think this item is pretty an exemplifier of that. My work causes strain that makes it difficult to fulfill family duties. So we really shouldn't be surprised if our measures of work-family conflict then are related to strain outcomes. So much of what we might be capturing with these standard approaches to measuring work-family conflict could be some generalized affective states. So this episodic approach, what is it about? So this would be a question that the participant would receive. Work-family conflict occurs when work and family produce competing demands. Did you experience work-family conflict today? So the design is still a daily diary type of design, but we get people to first just think about, did you experience a conflict today? And then we can ask a whole series of questions about that. But what it does is getting people to think about discrete events versus trying to come up with some sort of aggregate across a non-specified time again. So trying to think of discrete episodes of work-family conflict, also a more person-centric approach, trying to really understand what that experience is like when you have these competing demands, understand it as a decision-making process, and then also incorporate non-self-report sources of data. So I'll give you just a couple of examples of what we've done in this area. So the first thing that we wanted to do is incorporate these non-self-report forms of health information. So we had our participants wear, this is a wearable that can collect data on heart rate and blood pressure. So the participants took their heart rate and their blood pressure 4 times a day at specified times during the day. And they also reported if they experienced a work-family conflict that day and if they did the time that that conflict occurred. And here's an example of one of these episodes of work-family conflict. My parents are in town for the week. My husband sent me a text message to find out what we were going to do about dinner tonight, as well as potential plans to get together with his parents tonight or tomorrow. Had to stop working, respond to the text, figure it out, and so on. So it's kind of a common slice of life that can occur at any given time for most working parents. And what we found is that when people experienced a conflict, their heart rate increased. So we were able to connect the experience of having a conflict episode with a physiological reaction to it. And in this case, an increase in heart rate. So another example, trying to understand what happens after work-family conflict episodes occur. And in this study, we asked our participants if they had a conflict episode, what was most disruptive, but also the attribution for that episode. Was it something about the self, or was it something about the situation that caused that conflict? And then their emotional reaction to the conflict, specifically in this case, we're looking at guilt. And then at the end of the day, we captured recovery, so psychological detachment from work. And we also asked them if they were able to resolve the conflict in a satisfactory way. And then here again, we have an example of a conflict reported. I gave tests at school yesterday. Even though today is Saturday, I had to grade from home. My kids were annoyed and bothered that I couldn't focus on them. And just a quick summary of what we found. One of these cases where actually all of your hypotheses are supported. An internal attribution was associated with more guilt, but moderated by how satisfactory you felt your resolution was. Guilt associated with recovery, and that actually carried over to the next day. So those are a couple of examples of this episodic approach to studying work-family conflict. And I'm shifting gears a little bit now to talk about boundary management. And this is based on some research that we're doing right now in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we know that everyone experienced, most people, I guess, across the globe experience some period of lockdown. So many millions and millions of workers shifted to remote work. And that really raises a whole lot of issues about boundary management. So when we think about boundary management, we each have our own individual preferences for the extent that we would like to integrate our work and non-work roles versus segment them. And most people fall along a continuum. So those who prefer integration, their work and non-work lives are very much blended together. For those who prefer segmentation, they like to keep those work and non-work roles separate. And then of course, you have folks in the middle where there might be some integration, but not complete integration. And what this rapid transition to remote work has done for so many of us has completely thrown us all into this situation of integration, because we're working from home, our kids are out of school, they're home also, and it's been quite a challenge for many. And so there's a lot of talk now about how this may become a new norm. And we have all of these situations where people are trying to work from home while also managing dependents. And even if you don't have kids, you may have other housemates and that, again, make it challenging to focus on work. So we have two studies that we've conducted, again, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the first team is, the project is led by Kristen Shockley. This was a study funded by the National Science Foundation. And the other study, the project, is being led by my colleague here at USF, Kelsey Merlo. And we have some great graduate students working with us. And in both studies, we're looking at work, non-work balance. And the participants in these studies are individuals who did not work remotely prior to the pandemic, but had to shift to remote work in response to it. And what we found in the first study, the NSF-sponsored study, is that segmentation preferences were not related to work, non-work balance. But your spouse's respect for boundary management preferences were associated with more work, non-work balance. So when we have our boundary management partners, our coworkers, our spouses, in this case, case, when the spouse was more respectful of the preference, people reported more non-work balance. The frequency of family interruptions was associated with less non-work balance, work non-work balance. So the more frequently you're interrupted, the more difficult it is to balance. Now in study 2, we found that segmentation preferences were associated with more work non-work balance. That's not what we hypothesized. We actually hypothesized that people who prefer segmentation would have the most difficult time working remotely because it's not consistent, it's not aligned with their preferences. So trying to figure this out, we think maybe people's preferences for segmentation actually gave them some of the skills needed to better make that remote work situation work for them. And some of the things that were associated with more work non-work balance was having a home office with a door and having fewer household members. So this raises some issues about the home work environment. And here we have someone, we see what appears to be a pretty nice office setup, right? You've got some lovely artwork, pictures of friends and friends, nice clean desk. So that's probably, it's a decent situation for working from home, right? But others, not so much. We have people doing all kinds of crazy things to try and get some separation. So we have the SUV office. This is someone who's actually working out of his vehicle. We have a bathtub desk. This is someone who, this is the only place where he can find some quiet because he looks like he's got a little door there, but he's set up a desk over the bathtub. We have the clothes hamper desk. You know, you've got a studio apartment and you've got others there. How do you find some way to create a space that you can work from? And then the toilet desk. So this is the only spot in the house where you can't hear my 4 kids aged 5 to 9 is what the person wrote. So you have a lot of different home environments, and we've never really studied what the home environment is like for remote workers. But we did in this research. And what we found, this is one snapshot. I've been getting into trying to create infographics, but the ergonomics of the person's home workstation and the acoustical privacy that they had. And you saw how much that acoustical privacy was important based on those examples that I just showed. But both of those were related to psychological and physical outcomes. So the better those home conditions were, the less burnout or emotional exhaustion people reported, and the fewer physical discomfort symptoms people reported. So we've got some psychological and some physical health implications here. And then in the NSF study, another infographic here, we examined 62 possible predictors of the adjustment to remote work. We looked at this 3 ways: overall adjustment to remote work, stress level during remote work, and job performance relative to pre-pandemic. And what I have circled there is one of the top 5 predictors for all 3 of these outcomes was if your workspace at home was conducive to productivity. So things like having a monitor, you know, some basic equipment, some comfort factors, those were one of the strongest predictors of remote work effectiveness. And then one final infographic to show, we also looked at changes in health and behavior. And before remote work, participants exercised 3.58 times a week. That dropped to 3.04. stress increased from before to the start of remote work, but then decreased. So people did adapt to remote work after a period of time. And then a finding I thought was pretty interesting is that people reported at the start of remote work, 42, almost 43% of people indicated that they increased their alcohol drinking. So a lot of coping behavior there with the alcohol consumption, but that reduced afterwards. Okay, so some of the other health implications associated with the pandemic. All right, so to summarize, I know I've covered a lot of information. So summary and future, this episodic approach, I think, can lead to meaningful new insights into the experience of work-family conflict. We've been trying to incorporate some new tools, wearables. There's been a lot of advancements, and it's really going to permit us to better understand what the physiological reactions are to episodes of work-family conflict. And then remote work. I mean, this is just going to be a topic that is important for years to come. A lot of discussion about how this is going to really change the future of work. So I think there are lots of opportunities for more research to be done on this. I think the boundary management perspective is a good lens for looking at this issue. Mm-hmm. So the NSF study, we created, the first thing that we wanted to do is summarize all of this work for the public. So there is a 60 some odd page report and a 20 some odd executive report that's available for free, open access for the people here on Kristen's website that can be downloaded. And then finally, just an acknowledgement, most all of this research that I've talked about has been with my graduate students, and I've been very fortunate to work with so many awesome people throughout the years. And that's it.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Tammy. That's really, really interesting.
We still have time for questions. Yeah.
Yes, we do. We do. So we are going to open the mic. I know some people might have arrived a little bit later. So just letting you know that we recorded the webinar and it would be made available through the SOCIPCO web page, like with previous enrollment, like. So in the meantime, like any question, comment, etc.
So I have a question. As usual, Tammy, I'm the annoying guy, but but based on your experience and all the research that you have done in different topics or different, and also combining different approaches. So what would you say that is like the key takeaway that organizations should learn to help employees have a better life overall, in the sense that I'm pretty familiar with that line of literature, and it's kind of easy to come or to get to the conclusion that organizations are causing more damage than, let's say, contribute to well-being. So what should organizations do? Or what is the key takeaway that they should take from all this line of research? Like the first thing to do.
First thing to do. Let me start with the last topic, the remote work. And employers, I think, have an obligation to help their employees with their remote work home setup. And I know that in the US, we have the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, and OSHA goes to organizations, companies, and conducts safety checks. So things like the ergonomics of a workstation would be examined by OSHA. When people are working from home, there's no rules, no guidelines. So I think that employers have that, again, that obligation to give some guidance and provide the proper equipment, particularly if they're they've tried this remote work experiment, they think it's working, and they're going to continue having employees work from home. With the broader issue, I think it starts with the culture of the organization and taking employee well-being as something that is just as important as profit, and recognizing that profits cannot come at the expense of your workforce. Mm-hmm. So that's very broad and general. What are the action items that will facilitate that? But even beginning with that as part of the mission statement will go a long way and set the stage to trickle down through various levels of the organization.
Thank you. I have a following question. I'm Hector. I teach MBA students. Most of them are managers or are almost managers on their organizations. And for good or for bad, they are mostly concerned about the economic cost of managerial practices, right? Because in our classes, in our presentation, we say work-family conflict is essential, it's very important because it's related with the quality of life or well-being of people. And they say that's okay, but so what in terms of money for my organization? So is there any estimation or any study suggesting the financial or economical cost of not addressing family conflict or work family conflict issues?
So making the business case, right, for treating employees well or reducing work family conflict. And there has been some work. I think Leslie Hammer and Ellen Kosick have tried to do some of that work with their family supportive supervisor training. But it's hard to quantify in some cases. And I think part of it too is a mindset amongst managers of looking at the short term versus the long term. And even something, when I started studying family outcomes, I would get pushback from the journals saying, why does an organizational psychologist care about children, basically? And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Children are also stakeholders in our society. Children are your future workers. And so if you're starting by having practices in your organization that ultimately have a detrimental effect on kids, you're messing up right there. So, part of it is trying to get people to think more long-term and strategic and big picture. And, that's why I don't want to just focus on the financial business case. Think about society and what you're contributing overall to not only just your workers, but, we all should, this sounds so trite, we should all care about the children, right?
Right. My feeling is the culture in our country is changing. Today is more humane oriented in terms of cultivating and building a more relationship oriented or quality of life culture. But still there is a kind of, we are in the middle of two generations, the old-fashioned generation, thinking that the most important thing are outcomes, results of the company. But fortunately today, there is an increasing number of new managers or a new generation thinking about the quality of life of people. So I say that work-family balance could be something important for the near future in our culture, right?
Mm.
Absolutely.
Lorena, she was, I think she was raising hand.
Yes, I'd like to raise my hands. It's like the decent thing. Anyway, thank you for the invite and happy birthday, Elisa.
Yesterday.
I heard it yesterday. Anyway, thank you for a great presentation, Tammy. And I think most of us have followed your work at some point. And when I was listening to you, I am wondering, what do you think are the next step for IO research? The pandemic has, as you've mentioned, changed the workplace, and I was fascinated with human factors since the beginning of my training as IO psychologist. And I'm sure they're having a party because they've always claimed that IO psychology, it's under the umbrella of human factors. So I'm sure they're pretty happy about seeing this phenomena. So what do you think are going to be the effects on our research? I mean, I was thinking about writing a proposal, and I think a lot of the things that I've been thinking about, they're coming out so quickly. You talking about the new offices, the bathroom, the bathtub, that certainly has to have a great effect on how people think about their work, and what can we teach our managers on how to go about this. So what do you think about the new, maybe job analysis, job design is going to have a huge wave, and how can we deal with this in poorer countries? Because if there are limitations in the US, there are certainly even more limitations for countries in this region and the rest of the world, where people live in very small, very humble spaces. So how can we address these challenges, research, practice-wise? Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, great set of questions. One thing that comes to mind, and I've been conducting this research on telecommuting, flexible work, remote work for a long time, and there really hasn't been much of a focus on managers. Okay. And so the next study that we're hoping to do is to actually tackle that. There's not even a nice review piece of what we know about managers and from their perspective. Okay. We can ask employees. One of the things that we asked employees in the NSF study is the extent that they felt like their supervisor trusted them, because that's been one of the hangups with remote work, right? That the supervisor just doesn't, if he or she can't see you, doesn't think that you're working, doesn't know for sure if you're working.
Right.
And so for employees who felt like their supervisor did trust them, there were these positive outcomes associated with that. But again, this is all getting at this primarily from the perspective of the worker. So we need to better understand the manager and the manager's challenges of leading and managing remote work teams. So there's been some work looking at virtual teams. Brad Bell, for example, has done some of this, but I think this is a research area so that we can actually better answer the great questions that you're asking. I could tell a manager what I talked about before, helping your employees with the remote work setup, but we've got things like Zoom fatigue happening. But we're telling managers you need to keep your employees connected. So have these Zoom happy hours, but then everybody is tired and fatigued from all the Zooming happening. We know social isolation is a problem though. So there's a lot of tough nuts to crack. I don't know if that translates tough nuts to
It
crack.
translates really well. And one article that comes to mind, and it might be helpful for your research, it's the work of Blake Ashforth. I think it's an AMR, where he talks about what can managers do to help people in dirty occupations. I think it's a wonderful article.
I'm a big fan of his work.
I love him.
I love everything that he does. So yes, that's a great reference.
Thank you.
I do have something somebody else wants to
Yes,
say.
I have a question.
Good, go for it.
Very nice presentation, and I really thank you for all your work. And I would like to know if you, in your research, have you find any difference between men and women? Because we usually talk about workers in general, but for example, in Chile, we have very different roles, women and men. Women have a very low participation in the work market, and also usually if kids are assigned to women. In the study that we have done in this pandemic from March to now, actually the distribution of time in taking care of child or taking care of the home is completely different between men and women. Have you find any difference with men and women in your studies?
Yeah, so these current studies with remote work, we haven't dug into the gender differences yet because we're just getting to dig into the data. Kristen Shockley has a meta-analysis that was published in JAP maybe 2 years ago that looked at work-family conflict and gender. And basically there are no differences. Now, right, I see some eyebrows raised. It's like, what? How can that be? And I think part of it is it comes back to the way we're measuring work-family conflict. We're not really getting at it. We're not capturing what's really going on with these generalized assessments. So I've been keeping track of these post-COVID studies about the distribution of labor. I'm writing a National Academy of Science report on this. And we are finding that actually the distribution of non-paid labor is between men and women is shrinking because you have men at home and they're actually are taking on a little bit more, but it's still very wide. It's still that women are doing the majority of it, especially when it comes to the homeschooling of children. So this is a big topic, I think, for the future, how this is going to impact the careers of women. There are reports of women dropping out of the workforce, reducing their paid number of labor hours because to attend to non-paid domestic work. So yeah, it's a huge issue. And we've got to do a better job of parsing this out in the way we think about competing work and family demands.
Yeah, I got some complementary evidence from an ongoing study we are conducting in our research team. Today we got information about 8,000 employees from different organizations in Chile. We collected data in August about different variables related with remote work. And some information we got is different kind of feelings. And one of that is the feeling of feeling depressed or gloomy, or in some way is not depression properly, is a feeling of depression, so clinical, okay? And in the context of COVID and remote work. And something very, very interesting is that the higher level of feeling of depression are for men with no partner or no children. And that is really, really interesting because partners or children might be a protector or protective factors for men, which doesn't happen for women, but we have no information to explain that difference. So, but it's a very interesting finding, right?
That is very interesting. Yeah, that the social isolation is hitting men without families, I guess, pretty hard. Yeah, I think there's research that shows that men fare less well after divorce than women. Women get a happiness bump, men get a depression.
Yeah. So I think we are on time, but I would like to ask you a final reflection, is because I think something really, really interesting is issues on boundaries between work and no work, or work and family, particularly in the context of remote work, because now that border is blurry, or more blurry than before, right? Because you are working at home. So I read some insights or ideas that are really interesting in terms of how that situation might transform the identity of employees, or the work identity of employees, how they define themselves as workers. So is there any research on work-family conflict and identity of people?
The research that comes to mind is that looks at career and family salience, which isn't exactly identity, but the extent to which you are involved and your career is important versus your family is important. And again, Ellen Kosick has done some work looking at that in relation to boundaries. So I think what all of us who are in a remote work situation will need to do is think about what our boundaries are and some tactics that we can engage in to align our preferences with our situation. And I think a broader issue is, to what extent will we identify with the organization when we're working from home?
Yeah.
And then if we lose organizational identification, where is our work identification reside? Is it more of a boundaryless career type of orientation, for example? So I think those will be some really cool things to think about and try and investigate in the time ahead.
Okay, thank you.
I also wanted to say, like, it just comes to me once and over, like just how much this odd and tough pandemic time has created an amazing opportunity, I think, to create or to bring that awareness not only to supervisors, because all supervisors have also experienced this, and but also, like, I would say sometimes to these gender differences, like it hasn't come unnoticed by anyone, like the situation. And I think, like, it's a very rich opportunity, like to actually play a little bit around with that, like kind of and it might help, like, just to create this culture that values and that understands people as a life beyond work and something. But just reflections usually.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can all hope that there's something positive that comes out of all of this.
Yeah.
Got to hang on to that.
Definitely agree. Well, Tammy, just first of all, thank you for your time. It's been amazing and a great opportunity to meet you, even if it is online. but we definitely look forward for a future traveling of you to Patagonia and etc. And maybe we can get another seminar from you when you come for a visit.
And I want to say hi to Alvaro.
Ah,
Many, many, many years.
15 years ago, Tammy was part of my doctoral committee. Thank you.
all right. So
Very
Tammy,
nice to see you.
yeah, Tammy, as president of the society, I would like to thank you again for the time devoted to share with us your knowledge, your ideas, your experience. I think the topic of work-family balance is essential, and today organizations are more aware about these issues and having the opportunity to listen to research that has been done and novel opportunities for future research is really important for this community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, all of you.
Yes, and just cheekily ask you if there is some of our PhDs groups and etc. who would like to write you. Is that okay? Like you will know, like they are coming from Chile. They got your your ideas and yeah. So
Anytime.
you might receive a couple of emails every now and then from some of us.
Absolutely, anytime.
Well, related to that, for me, staying in USA for a year and collaborating with Tammy and getting to know her started with an email. So I wrote an email, said, okay, let's Skype, because back in the days we used to Skype. And I ended up going there as an exchange student. And we have been friends since then. So send her an email. Send her emails.
Yeah. A last question, Tammy. Are you happy if we post the recording of this presentation in our website?
Sure, that's fine.
That's fine. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Happy to share
Thank
information.
you. Okay. Have a lovely rest of your day, and thank you very much for this.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you very
Tammy,
much.
thanks.
Take
Bye.
good care.